we began the Song of Songs. And Song of Songs means the most important song or the best song. And I don't know how many of you have ever read this book, but it is a collection of Bedouin wedding songs. If you remember in the ancient world, if you had a wedding or something, you'd hire a troubadour, and they'd make up songs. If they made up a really good one, then people would tend to use that over and over again at things. And these are really good songs that developed in the thing. And they're put together, but they're put together in a very loose framework. And I want to tell you what the framework is. The framework is a young man who's a shepherd. And this shepherd falls in love with a young lady. And this young lady is picked up in the dragnet to put women in the Sultan's harem. So she ends up in the Sultan's harem. And the basic thing of the book is how this shepherd and this woman are going to get together and get away from the Sultan. Okay, that's basically how it's put together. Now, it's very loose because they put together these songs, and you oftentimes will go off into paths to the side. It is the last book to be accepted as inspired by the Jewish authors. Okay, so the Jewish thing, it's the last one. There's some very curious things about it. If you study monastic things like the Rule of St. Benedict, the monks are forbidden to read this book after noon. And they were forbidden because of the sexual imagery. They didn't want it to affect their dreams, okay? On the other hand, any saint in history that I know of personally who has asked to have the Bible read to them as they were dying always chose this book. And it's the idea that in the Jewish tradition, this book actually represents the relationship of God to Israel. Now, in the Catholic Church, we would see it as God to the Catholic Church. But in Catholic spirituality, it's very strongly seen as God's relationship to the individual as well. Okay? And that's that idea of the relationship to Israel is how the Jews finally accepted it in the scriptures. But it was the very last book to be accepted. Okay? It's not the last one to be written, but it was the last one to be accepted into the canon. Okay? The first verse said Solomon's Song of Songs. So it's attributed to Solomon, and the Solomon is the king, but Solomon is mentioned in the song, but the connection with Solomon, I would say 3/4 of this existed long before Solomon. And this book was put together probably about the year 400, 500 BC. It was put together. But so that Solomon didn't really write this. So the first lines are from the woman. And she says, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is sweeter than wine. Delicate is the fragrance of your perfume, and your name is an oil poured out. Therefore, girls love you." Now, what she's doing is she's speaking of the shepherd boy now. So she says, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth." Remember, in the Mideast, now that I think about it, in the Mideast, I have never seen a man and woman kiss. I've seen men kiss, I've seen women kiss, but I've never seen a man, even a husband and wife, I have never seen kiss. Kissing for them, is particularly in relationship to sexual things, takes place in private between a man and a woman, the kissing. And so she's asking for this. And she says, "Your love is sweeter than wine." And again, this priority that in the world what is most important, ultimately, what's most important to her is the love of this man. Now, understand, she's in the court. So in the court, she would have servants that she would never have with the shepherd boy. She has meals like she would never experience with the shepherd boy. She has all this, and she says, all of this is nothing in relationship to the love of you, okay? And the voice of the woman is seen as the voice of Israel, the church, or an individual person. That in reference to God, God's love has got to become most important to me, okay? So, above the things of life. He says, delicate is the fragrance of your perfume. Your name is an oil poured out. Therefore, girls love you. This delicate is the fragrance of your perfume. I think all of us have had the experience of a person whose perfume was anything but delicate. The delicacy in the use of perfume is an art, okay? And I must say it's an art that's better known by women than men. Like at Mass, when I'm distributing communion, I'm more likely to be bowled over by shaving lotion than I am by perfume. I think women probably have a better knowledge of it. I really, I remember seeing, I think it was, who was the Swedish guy who did Persona? A Swedish, Bergman, yeah. He was Swedish? Yeah. Bergman did a movie one time, and in this movie, this young man is getting ready to go visit his girlfriend. And so he's showered and he's getting ready, and he goes over to the cologne, and the woman who's helping him get dressed to go, he starts the cologne, and she says, you know, the cologne is to mix with your scent. You don't want her to be attracted to the bottle of cologne, okay? And so that you need to use it minimally in reference to your own body. But I always thought it was interesting hearing that. And this whole idea, the fragrance is delicate, and your name is an oil poured out. And this name being an oil poured out is, we use all kinds of different things now they didn't have in the ancient world. But you know, if you got oil on you, it didn't go away. The oil wasn't the sort of thing they knew how to wash off. In fact, there's a very famous passage in one of St. Augustine's sermons where he talks about, you know, during the Easter Vigil, when people become Catholics, they're anointed with chrism. And I don't know if you know this, but chrism has balm in it. So it's olive oil. Balm is the sap from balsa wood. Okay? So the sap from balsa wood is put into this. It's an amazing fragrance. But St. Augustine said in his cathedral, he could smell it in the cathedral whenever a congregation gathered for a month after the thing. And that's because it would be in your hair, and you know, you just don't get rid of it. So this idea of the oil being poured out, your name is an oil poured out. The thing is, she's with these women in the harem type thing, and in the harem, every time she hears his name, you can tell it. If you're sitting there watching her and you hear the name, you can tell immediately. I don't know if I told you, I was at a dinner in New York. It was a really funny thing. It was a dinner to raise money for Mother Teresa's mission. And so she gives this talk on the poverty and the needing of money and everything. And the dinner they served was prime rib. So they served this dinner. But anyway, someone else I got up was talking, and I was like across from Mother Teresa, but about 4 chairs down. So I'm kind of watching, and the guy who's talking is up on a podium behind Mother Teresa. Okay, so he's talking, and one of the things that I noticed, the guy mentioned the name Jesus 4 times in the talk, And every time he mentioned the name Jesus, Mother Teresa blushed. It was though you could see the relationship, just like that, she blushed. It was really cute. So, and he says, she says, therefore, girls love you. And now she says, draw me to you, let us run. So she says, you need to find a way to get me out of here, and we need to go off together. The king has brought me into his rooms, but we shall rejoice and delight in you. We shall praise your love more than wine. Rightly do they love you. And he's talking about the women, even the other women in the thing, look on this shepherd boy with love. And she wants him to somehow draw her. And this is the prayer we hold, in the presence of God. It's an interesting thing that in the presence of God, God is an individual I do not see. God is an individual I do not touch. God is an individual I believe in. God is an individual I believe has acted powerfully in my life. But that's all belief, I don't have anything to go into court to say that God exists. I don't have anything to do with that. And so I realize that it is up to God to find a way to get the communication thing. Because all my communication is through my body. I speak, I write, I make signs, and God does none of that. So I need to find a way for God to draw me, okay? And notice what she says, that draw me after you. One of the things that I think is spectacular in the scriptures and in human life is that God has very different ways of drawing people. And so, there's some people who can sit down in a spiritual book and end up the height of, Other can open the Bible and do it. Some people do it like they feel so close to God at the beach or walking in a forest. I mean, there are just 1,000 ways. And I mentioned to you before that one of my favorite is that woman who did the silk screens. Creta Kent. That she found a way to do it with advertisements. I'm sure I've told you about them before, but the least evocative thing for me with regards to God is advertisement. But she sent me a Christmas card one time, and the Christmas card on the front was a traditional Italian Madonna and child. But inside the card, she wrote what is the motto of the Hallmark card company, which is, he cared enough to send his very best. Okay? She did one time a photograph, and it's a photograph of a parking lot. And the photograph focuses on a dandelion that has broken through the asphalt. And she had a single word inside, resurrection. And one of the things we had framed in the seminary was a Wheaties box. And if you didn't look carefully at the Wheaties box, you didn't notice. But what it said was Eucharist, Breakfast of Champions. But I mean, he saw all of this in advertisement, and that was how God drew her. If you look at Joseph in the Bible, both the Old Testament Joseph and the New Testament Joseph, God speaks to them through dreams. God spoke to Mary through an angel. That God has different ways of drawing us. And we want God to look at me and how I can be best drawn, and that's how he should draw me. Okay? So, going on. She says, I am swarthy, but lovely. Incidentally, the older translation of this, which actually is more comfortable for me, is I am black but beautiful. And he says, daughters of Jerusalem. So she's addressing this to this chorus in this whole thing called the Daughters of Jerusalem. And what she means by that the darkness, in the Mideast, there's a high, high value on being pale. And the reason is that a person who's dark gets dark because they work out in the sun. And a person who never goes out in the sun, and we would call pasty, but they consider that beauty. So she says, I am swarthy, or I am dark because I have had to work, She was, with the shepherd before. But she says, I'm still beautiful. Or the term she uses here is lovely. She says, like the tents of Kedar, the awnings of Solomon. These tents of Kedar, if you go to the Bedouins in Israel, and I don't know how they are in different parts of the Mideast, but the tents are black. And the reason is the tents are woven from goat hair. And goat hair is very coarse. And when they weave this, goat hair is kinky, okay? So as it's woven together, it gets very tight, and goat hair is waterproof. So what they would do is build a tent, and then on top of it, they put a tent of goat hair. And the reason why you put the two together is so that you put a layer of air between the heat that will be absorbed by the black and the white that's going on, the tent below because of the heat in the desert. But she's saying the same way. She says it's like the tents of Kedar. And what are the tents? They're black on the outside, but inside you've got Persian carpets, these beautiful lamps, and all that sort of thing. She says, I'm dark on the outside, but she says, I'm really lovely. She says, do not stare at me because I'm swarthy. It is the sun that has burned me. My mother's sons were angry with me. They made me tend the vineyards, but my own vineyard I did not tend. And so she says, the sons were angry with her, and because they were angry with her, they put her out in the fields to do the work. Like if you had a sister, you'd try and keep her indoors because that's her thing of finding a husband, to be beautiful and light and pale. And so she says, I had to tend their vineyards. I never got to attend myself. So she says, I'm dark because of this, okay? So she's basically saying that it's the work that she's been put to. And then she says, tell me, you whom my soul loves, where you pasture your flock, where you rest it at noon. And so what she says now, you communicate to me where you'll be at noon. Because as a shepherd, now he takes usually a small flock, maybe 12 sheep, and he'll go somewhere. And as a shepherd, the main thing you know is where you're going to stop. And the reason is, up to that point, as soon as the sheep eat everything, then you keep moving on. But where you stop, and they took a nap in the afternoon, but where you stop, you want a lot of greenery around and you want water around. So you pick this place that you're going to stop. It says, let me know where you're going to stop, where you'll be at noon. And I don't know how many of you have been to Israel, but one of the things you'd know if you were at Israel, that the people rise in the morning very early, about 4. And the idea is you get in as much work as you can before the sun is outrageous. And then they come in for what we would call a breakfast, but is probably their largest meal of the day. It's a huge meal. Or Israeli breakfast is a huge meal. And then, you go on until noon, and you work in that time the lighter stuff, okay? And then they stop early in the evening, too. And this idea that they have to take a nap out, like about 2.5 hours is their nap in the afternoon, because it's too hot to do anything at that time. So she says now, tell me where you'll be. She said, that I not need to be like a woman veiled beside the flock of your companions. And she says that you need to tell me where you're pasturing your flock, because there's a danger that I will follow the tracks of another flock and end up with another shepherd. So just following the path isn't going to do it. I have to know which one it is your path. Now, what they're talking about here is there are many paths to holiness. Like, for instance, as a person who's involved in the study of religion, we're well acquainted with Roman Catholic saints. I could go through a list of them. But you can go into the Jewish tradition and end up with people like Abraham Heschel, who are saints the equal of anything we've got over here. You can go into the Hindus and end up with Gandhi, who's the equal of any saint we have. And you can go into the Buddhist tradition and end up with Kubagashi, who's the equal of any of the... The thing is, there are many paths to holiness. I want to know the path that God wants me on to get to holiness. Okay, so that's what I want him to reveal. What is the path to him, and what is the particular path that I should be following? He says, if you do, now this is him answering. He says, if you do not know this, O loveliest of women, follow the tracks of the flock and take your kids to graze beside the shepherd's tents. Okay? So first of all, he's saying if you don't know this, follow the tracks of the flock. And what he's saying here in the tracks of the flock, he says, look around you and see the people around you who have arrived at holiness. And what are the path they followed? Okay? Now, you realize this would be very true to a tradition. Like if I were Jewish, I would tend to think in terms of Jewish holy people. If I were Muslim, I tend to think in terms of Muslim holy people, okay? But that's what it's saying. Look at the people who seem to have arrived at holiness, because that's my flock. He says, so look at that and follow them. And take your kids to graze beside the shepherd's tents. Your kids are the people who follow you. So that like you follow their tracks, you have people who follow you. And beside the shepherd's tents, that's where God dwells. Now he begins to speak again. He says, I compare you, my love, to a mare among Pharaoh's chariots. He uses a lot of comparisons that I don't think would work today. Comparing a woman to a horse is probably not the best opening line. I don't know if I ever told you this story. There was a program on TV one time where it was one of these life programs type of thing, but they invited people who were having really a serious time finding girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever, and they offered to film them on a date. And then, but anyway, so this one young man came up, and I don't remember a lot of it, but the part I remember I think was good. He went on this date, and the girl never wanted to see him again afterwards. Never made contact with him or anything, and wouldn't answer his calls. But anyway, so he was asking the people who filmed it what was wrong. And they said, do you remember that the girl told you that her mother had died? He says, yes, she told. And you remember that you told her you understood what she was feeling? He says, of course. And you said you understood because you had a goldfish who died when you were in grade school? He says, yes. No, that you don't understand because your goldfish died. That's different than your mother dying, believe it or not, So anyway, this thing, again, it has to do with kind of your background. I find horses to be some of the most beautiful things in the entire world. My sister used to raise quarter horses. I'm terrified on a horse, because when I'm on a horse, I know he's in charge, and he knows he's in charge. But I love to run in the field and chase the horses, and they'll chase you. And I mean, I love to be around horses. And I just think the way they move, the way they act, they stand elegant. They're gorgeous. And that's how they saw them. If you're familiar with Greek art, after people, horses are the major thing that appear in Greek art, and that's because of the beauty of the form. Okay? He says, your cheeks show fair between their pendants, and your neck within its necklaces. We shall make you gold earrings with beads of silver. And what he's talking, he says, like your cheeks show fair beneath their pendants. You remember in the Mideast, they have all this jewelry they hang on their face. And the idea is, when I look at you, I'm not looking at the gold. I'm looking at your cheeks. That's the idea that the same thing like we described with the perfume is to accent you, not to cover you. The same thing with jewelry is to accent. And so he says, and she said, while the king rests in his own room, my nard yields its perfume. And nard is a plant, grows about this high, comes from Tibet. And I think what I would most compare it to, not the flower, but what I would most compare the plant to is a calla lily. And what you would do with nard is you would take off the bloom that has that thick stem, you cut the stem, and you roll a rock down the thing, and it yields a liquid that is the color of rubies, but the consistency of honey. It's the consistency of honey. And it is one of the most powerful perfume ingredients in the Mideast. It's called nard. You remember Mary Magdalene had the vial of aromatic nard, and it was alabaster. Nard is always stored in stone. And the reason is, and again, I think you would all know this, what causes a perfumery thing to give off scent is heat. So if you have perfume, you should always store perfume instantly in a refrigerator, because the cooler it is, the less chance that the scent goes away. Okay? So this aromatic nard was always stored that way. And it was also one of the most expensive perfumes at the time. Okay? So he says, my love is a sachet of myrrh hanging between my breasts. And in the ancient world, in fact, in museums, you may oftentimes see this. They're small, let's say, lockets, and they're made out of filigree, like a design cut into them. In the ancient world, they used to put, like you'd put mint in it, or an aromatic herb of some kind, and you wear it around your neck. It was one of the things like perfume, okay? So you would wear this, and that's what she's describing. But this statue is filled with myrrh. Myrrh is the sap from a tree, and it is a sort of rust brown. It's a mixture of red and brown, and it's oftentimes used in church, in the in our incenses. He says, my love is like a cluster of henna flowers in the vineyards of En-Gedi. En-Gedi is, if you go to Israel, En-Gedi is the one national park in Israel. And there's a stream that flows down En-Gedi. And if you walk up the stream empties into the Dead Sea. And if you walk up that stream, you'd swear you're in Hawaii. The branches of the trees and stuff overhang it all, so you're in the shade. The water's flowing, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful place. And there are cliffs that rise on the side, and there are ibis all over the cliffs. They're about the size of a horse, and they have horns that go clear back on either side of the animal in the back. I don't know what they're used for, but they and they're up on these things. David hid in En-Gedi when King Saul was chasing him, and the reason he did that was he could be in En-Gedi with the small army he had with him, and the water and everything would be sufficient for them. But if Solomon's army came in there, they wouldn't have water. And so, because there isn't that much water in Gedi, and it flows down. It's an absolutely beautiful area. But anyway, one of the things that grows there is henna. And I think, in the ancient world, henna was very valuable. It's one of the very few things you can actually do to your hair that's good for it. Henna is a beauty product, but it's actually good for your hair, too. And it renders your hair sort of a reddish brown. It gives a real reddish hue to the hair. Okay? And he says, "How beautiful you are, my love. How beautiful you are. Your eyes are like doves." One of the things we will oftentimes see in these different descriptions of beauty of a woman, it is the reference to the eyes. And one of the reasons is probably the most common disease in that whole area is blindness. And it comes about as a result of the fact that all the animals, everything, are defecating in the streets, along with the people as well. And the climate is unbelievably dry. So this is all rendered dust by people walking and everything. It's all in the air. And if you go to some place like Iran or Iraq or something like that, almost the sign that you've made the Hajj to Saudi Arabia is that you're blind. Almost everyone who makes the Hajj historically would come back blind. And it's because this is all in that air, in that desert area. And so if a woman has white eyes, it's a great sign of beauty, and that in the whites of her eyes here. He says, "How beautiful you are, my love, and how you delight me. Our bed is the greensward." But he's basically saying our bed is out in nature, okay, in the grass or something like that. He says, "The beams of our house are cedar trees, and its paneling the cypress." Okay, the cedars, I think grow very straight and tall. And what made the cedars of Lebanon so famous was they could be used for the masts of ships. And so they were very famous for that. When the Temple of Solomon was built, in order to put the beams in the temple, they were all imported from Lebanon. And remember, I told you, Solomon was very wealthy. So Solomon brought all of this into Israel. And so he's describing, if they're cedar trees, that's a large house, okay? And the paneling inside would be cypress. She responds to him now, because he's talking about, and she says, "I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valley." When we talk about plants or stones, they spoke of it very differently in the ancient world. Like, for instance, they will call a stone a red stone. Now, when you translate that into, let's say, an English Bible, you'd have to figure out where they're talking about. Because if they're talking about Africa and they mention a red stone, they're talking carnelian. If they're talking about a red stone and you're talking about, let's say, the Borrego Desert, you're talking garnets. If you talk about a red stone and you're in Sri Lanka, you're talking about a ruby. Okay? But they didn't use that. They just went colors. They did the same thing with flowers. A rose is the most beautiful flower. So the rose of Sharon is most probably the narcissus, which was regarded as their most beautiful flower in that area. Okay? But like if you were in Hawaii, the rose would be an orchid. If you were, in, whatever. But the most beautiful thing. And when they talk about a lily, the lily is the most common flower. So the lily of the valley here is a reference to poppies. In the Mideast, The most common flower is the poppy. And it's really interesting that, rain is very rare. But when they get the rain, you can look out over the desert and you'll see pools of blood. And those are red poppies because the water settled on the thing there, and they just come up and they all bloom at once. Of course, they're gone pretty quickly because of the dryness. But you just see they look like pools of blood. They're these really bright red lilies. So she says, as a lily among the thistles, so is my love among girls. And so she's saying that as a lily, and remember, this is really the common one. She says, among thistles, so is my love among the girls. Now remember, up above, she was describing that the girls all love him. So she loves him too. So as this love, it is the love they all have. But the unique thing about it is, it's her love of him, okay? Not that, I guess we're talking about the reciprocity ultimately. Okay, why do we call it there? And that's chapter 2, verse 3. And we'll see if there are any questions.